Alright guys, today we're going to be looking at a series of unexplainable stories from the internet. I mean, mostly from just Reddit. There's only like one that's not from Reddit. If you do end up enjoying this video, please be sure to subscribe. I've got a lot of similar stuff like this coming out in the future. Anyways, let's not waste any time. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and shut the blinds, because these stories are going to send a chill down your spine. So, while looking for these stories, I found an Ask Reddit post titled, "Forest Rangers, what are your downright unexplainable stories?" There were some fairly creepy ones in this thread, but this one in particular definitely stands out. I was 12 at the time, 1998, and my friends and I decided to go on a hike in our rural area in Nova Scotia, Canada. We packed lunches and set forth up a really big hill and into the woods. We're subdivision kids. We only play in each other's yards or backyard, and sometimes the wooded area between our houses, if there was any. Roughly a half hour in, we notice a path that looked like a road that four-wheelers might have made. As we continue on, there's like 8 of us, ages ranging between 8 and 12. We see a wide area in the woods that was made into a camping site. Beds were made out of fresh brush, there was a fire pit with stacked wood, just a really cool spot. We thought maybe Boy Scouts set this up, as training exercises or something. So we settle down and eat our snacks, still admiring these perfect beds. We were laughing and carrying on, coming up with silly names on what to call this place. It was late afternoon, sun still shining, and my friends wanted to go home. I told them I was going to stick around and see what else I could find in the area. They tried to get me to come back with them, but I told them I'd be leaving soon after looking around. I laid in the grass and looked up, seeing the bright blue sky with very few clouds and a light breeze. I was so relaxed. I felt so proud to have helped discover something. Then I heard a branch snap. I sit up and start to look around. Nothing out of the ordinary. I see trees upon staggered trees until I look farther into the distance and see something hanging from a tree. It's far away. Stupidly, I get up and walk towards it. I still can't make out what it is, but as I keep walking, I start to audibly let out some nervous laughter. I get closer to it, roughly 80-ish feet away, and it looks like a body. I freeze. Now I'm panicking. Are my eyes playing tricks on me? There's no fucking way that's what I think it is. For whatever reason I'll never know, uncharacteristically of me, I continue to walk towards it. My heart is racing, and my legs become weaker and weaker. I get close enough to actually see it is in fact a body hanging from a tree. I freak the fuck out and run the other way. As I'm running like my fucking life depends on it, my mind is racing faster than my legs. I run and run and run until I finally catch up with the others. They're all asking me what's wrong, why I was running, and I'm trying so hard to catch my breath that I actually fell over. They all gathered around me trying to help me and frantically asked questions while the friends my age were crying. In between my breaths, I told them I saw a body hanging. Now everyone is crying. We sat down far away from the campsite and I'm describing what happened. Told my parents, they didn't believe me. By this time it was dark, and there was no way in hell I was going back up there that night. I told them I'd show them in the morning. I didn't sleep at all. All I could think of was that horrible looking face. My mind wouldn't stop racing, thinking about it over and over. Finally it was light out, and I woke up my parents and got ready to show them. We walked back to the place and found the brush beds. I showed them where I laid and where I started looking. I couldn't see where it was, so I told them to follow me as I tried remembering in which direction it was. I kept walking, whimpering, waiting to see the body again. I didn't. It was gone. This one's also from Ask Reddit, but it was from a different thread made in 2013. This time, the question was, have you ever had an unexplained or paranormal experience? Here was one reply from user Luke James. There was this guy I used to work with called Dan. Dan was a chill guy who everybody got on with, but was a little weird at times. He used to believe in a lot of things. Aliens, ghosts, government experiments, the lot. He wasn't religious, but that's besides the point. Anyway, while messing around at work, he's explaining stupid things to us. About how he's seen spaceships and how all this paranormal stuff happens when he's at home. Some of it is quite ridiculous, but I listen anyway. A couple of weeks later, he invites me around for a few beers. I was driving, so I couldn't really drink, but I still went over. We get onto the subject of ghosts, and he starts explaining things to me, like how he was once eating an apple and it exploded just as he went to take a bite. I laughed it off and thought it could have just been some sort of pressure with the way he was holding it, causing it to explode. He was dead serious about this, though. He pulled out a few pictures of this apple and started showing me the damage it had done to him. There was a picture of him with a cut on his cheek caused by this apple. However, I was still not convinced of this ghost he had in his house. He was not messing around. He said, "Hold on, actually I'll show you." He pulls out this shoebox full of pictures from around the house. He says, "Just flick through these, you'll see." I sigh and say, "Okay." I'm going through these photos of a recent Christmas, the usual photos. Kids opening up presents, the family having Christmas dinner, having a few drinks at night, a group shot. I stop. This was the photo that left me in awe. His family was standing in front of this mirror, and I shit You not, in the reflection of the mirror was an Edwardian girl, smiling straight at the camera. This was not one of those could be a smudge type of things. It was not a hidden behind someone or can barely make it out type of thing either. No, this was a clear, colored photo with the girl's reflection being black and white. You could make out her face, her smile, her clothes, her hands, everything. It doesn't end there though. Dan says to me, "I told you, I wasn't shitting you." I go to the next photo. Same sort of thing. Family members have moved around and so is the girl. She's doing a different pose. She's smiling, showing her teeth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was this black and white girl standing right in the mirror smiling at me, like she'd been there the whole time. I felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice cold water over me, like I was being watched, like I wasn't welcome anymore and I felt I needed to leave. I put the photos back in the box and not long after, I left. I still don't believe in ghosts, aliens, or anything of that matter, but I know what I saw and I know it scared the shit out of me. Alright, this is from a similar Ask Reddit post, but this was actually very recent. This was only on October 9th, 2022. This story is from a childhood friend, and it still unnerves me to this day. She was genuinely freaked out, and her family even backed up her claims, so here goes. Basically, my friend and her family moved into this rental property, which my friend said was haunted. It gave everyone an off feeling. Those who visited or stayed over would mention it. I myself experienced this odd feeling whenever I went over there, and believed in the consensus that the house was haunted. You would feel this pitiful dread that is hard to put into words, and was extremely uncomfortable to experience, to say the least. Anyways, this particular inexplicable event was enough for my friend's family to pack up and stay with the relatives until they moved out permanently. On this fateful afternoon, my friend had arrived back home from the park and heard an argument taking place in the kitchen between her mom and dad. My friend thought this was odd, as both her parents should be at work, so she called out, "Mom?" Before unlocking the front door and going inside, my friend said the house fell instantly silent. An uncanny silence, like all the air had been sucked out of the place. It felt stifling and wrong. Then her mom said, "Hey, friend's name, we're just in here." My friend was just outside the closed kitchen door at this point, and froze. It was her mother's voice, but there was something off, like the cadence was missing, that made it her mother's. It sounded flat and unnatural. My friend decided to bolt back out the front door and wait until her brother came home, but she said as she turned back to the house, she saw her mother peering at her from the lounge room window. But it wasn't her mother. The face was the same, everything was the same, but her face was devoid of anything that made it her mother. There was no recognition on her mother's face. There was no indication that she was looking directly at her daughter. There was no emotion in the expression, nothing. The eyes looked utterly blank. My friend screamed and ran down the street to her mother's work and confirmed that she was there all this time and had never been home. Initially, my friend's mother reasoned that someone must have broke in, but a later investigation proved nothing had been stolen and the back door was locked, as was the front door when my friend came home. No one could rationalize who my friend saw in the window and why it looked so much like her mother, but not fully human. So that was the deciding factor to nope the fuck out of there and find somewhere else to live. The landlord of the house denied anything like this happening when they lived there, but did admit tenants didn't stay long as there was something wrong in the house. Okay, I can't be the only one thinking of the Mandela catalog, right? I don't know, this idea of like something that's not human trying to look human, and more than that, trying to look like somebody that other people know, is freaking scary as hell. I'm not saying that I believe in this, but to me, this story, when I read this, it sounds like, I'm not saying that I believe this, but what I'm immediately thinking of is that there's some sort of like shape-shifting being in this house that's like trying to trap this person by impersonating the mom. I don't know. That would be a good idea for a story, but I don't know. Now, what I'm about to say might freak you out a little bit. I know I couldn't really sleep for a little bit when I first heard this. Now, I'm sure you guys know of the uncanny valley. It's basically just the idea that things that look almost human, but not quite, tend to freak us out a little bit. And it seems to be sort of an inherited thing. Like, we all believe this. We all kind of get freaked out when we see, like, creepy dolls or mannequins, things like that. The fact that that fear exists at all implies that at some point way back in human history, it was advantageous to be afraid of a being that looked human or was trying to impersonate people, but wasn't actually a person. Almost like there was some sort of strange species of monsters or something that, like, tried to impersonate people in order to trick them. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just saying when I heard that, it freaked me out because it kind of makes sense. Anyways, enough with all that weird crap. This next one is one of my favorites. I'm not going to talk about it much just because I don't want to spoil anything, but we'll talk about it afterwards. This is taken from the same Ask Reddit post as before. Okay, so once when I was about 9 years old, it was late at night, I'm asleep in my room, and my younger sister, 8, is asleep down the hall in her room. It's not uncommon for us to run into each other's rooms if we have a nightmare. You know, when you're trying to outrun the demons, just run and jump into someone else's bed. Well, this night I literally wake up out of a dead sleep, it's dark, the moon is high outside my window, and my sister is standing in my doorway. It's not debatable that it's her. Her height, her stupid haircut down to the New Kids on the Block oversized t-shirt nightgown from my mom's youth. But she's just standing there. One hand on the doorknob, other hand on the doorframe, staring at me. Silent. I look at her for a minute, and then kind of annoyed, I throw my blanket off. Well, come on in if you're coming in here. She doesn't move, doesn't say anything. She's still staring. And I'm not even creeped out at this point, I'm just annoyed and sleepy. I jump out and stomp over to where she is and stop about arm's length in front of her. She's still silent, still staring. Now I'm a little creeped out. What are you doing? And I swipe at her overhand. She disappears as my hand falls. Like, not dissipates into nothing, like straight up is gone. I look back at my bed, I look in the hallway, nothing. So I run to her room down the hall because it's that time. Nightmare time. Zoom! Jump wrestle into her covers. And when I get there, I notice she is there, thank God, but she's shaking violently. She's having a fucking seizure. So I run to my parents' room, turn all the lights on, yelling that my sister is having a seizure. We go to the emergency room and she gets her diagnosis of childhood epilepsy. I also didn't even know what a seizure was when I started yelling about this, which was also weird. I honestly think to this day that she astral projected or something. That bitch found a way to come to get me because she was in trouble in her bed. Now look, I'm very skeptical when it comes to this stuff, but the idea of astral projecting is like so fascinating to me. I made a similar video on this a few months ago about the CIA when they literally like did a huge project on this and actually tried to induce astral projecting. It's crazy. The only reason why this interests me so much is because we don't really know anything about consciousness or the mind or really like how this stuff works. You know what I mean? Like we don't know if there is a soul or not. And like what if she really was dying and her soul kind of left her body and went to go get her sister to like help save her, you know what I mean? Because that's like her natural instinct is to get up and run to her sister when she's scared. So what if her like consciousness just did that? You know what I mean? I don't know. Again, I don't really believe in this stuff, but it's an interesting idea. Okay, this next one is a little bit more interesting than creepy. I've told only a few people of this and posted once in a glitch group, which I don't know if you can call it a glitch, paranormal, or just unexplained, but here it is. I've always dreamt very vividly and had small things I've dreamt of actually happen months or years later, but nothing as big as this. I've had this recurring dream since I was about 6 or so, up until I was in my mid-20s, now 38. But I dreamt about seeing myself as a little girl, which was weird. I always saw myself as an adult in my dreams, on a carousel, and waving to myself and being so happy. I was wearing a romper that was popular back in the 80s for little girls, and a pair of sandals. I always wondered why I would dream of this, like maybe something traumatic happened and my brain was trying to remember or some shit, but turned out to be quite the opposite. So fast forward to 2018, I was at a fair with my family and my boyfriend took our daughter, 2.5, on the carousel as I waited, taking pictures and being so giddy and happy. I didn't realize it at the time until I was going through the pictures later that it was that dream that I had had on and off for years. It was my future daughter I was seeing in my dreams all along, not myself. Same outfit and shoes, same overwhelmingly happy feeling for just a regular day at the fair. Everything was just the same. I cry just thinking about it. I know some people don't believe me, but I don't care. It's a magical thing that I experienced, and I pull up the photo of her from that day from time to time, and I'm just in complete shock over it to this day. Again, I can definitely see how this is a coincidence, but it's very interesting that she was wearing the exact same thing that she remembers from the dream. Now, if this was a dream she'd only had like once or twice, that would be a different thing, and she could have easily just filled in the blanks. But I know from personal experience, when you have like a recurring dream, certain facts get solidified in your head. And the fact that she had been having this dream from when she was 6 all the way until like mid-20s just shows that like she knows this dream and she knows what the kid was wearing and everything. So I don't know, I've heard some weird stories like this from people I know in my life. What do you guys think? I want to know in the comments. We're moving on to a post titled, "What are some of the most bizarre and unexplainable disappearances that you know about?" One user wrote the following. Ben McDaniels. He was a scuba diver who went down into an underwater cave system known as the Vortex in Florida, which he was really familiar with. He was constantly reading about cave diving, had a lot of books on the topic, and it was something he was really passionate about. There's a section of the cave that's gated off. You have to have a key to get in, which you only get if you're a certified cave diver. Ben wasn't certified. He was really into being self-taught. They believe he was somehow able to shimmy under the gate a few times and was able to have successful dives in this part of the cave. Eduardo, an employee, was diving and had seen him do this and decided to leave the gate open for Ben. Ben was last seen heading into the open gate by Eduardo and other witnesses. A couple days pass and Eduardo sees Ben's car, so immediately lets the staff know and it becomes a recovery mission. They found 3 decompression tanks, all with Ben's name on them, 2 outside the cave and 1 inside the cave. Also important to note, 1 was completely empty, 1 was half used, and 1 was not used at all, showing Ben was actively using them to eventually get back to the surface. They still found no sign of Ben. So they have a community of talented divers go in and try to recover his body. The divers went through these narrow spaces yet still never found a body. Mind you, Ben is 6 foot. The divers went through these narrow spaces yet still never found a body. They tried to find any sign of scratches on the wall, which was limestone, any disturbances or signs of Ben, but still nothing. Then, Ed Svorenson, who is a seriously incredible diver, went as far as a human could possibly go, even turning his head at an angle in order to fit into these tunnels, and still no Ben. They even send in a remote control camera. It got 700 feet into the cave until it couldn't fit anymore. Still nothing. Police had theorized that Ben had lodged himself into a narrow space that he couldn't get out of. Most divers think that there is no way Ben is even in that cave. Some people think that he purposely staged this to start a new life, but his family said they were very close to Ben and he was in a better stage in his life. They lost their other son at 22 to a stroke, so they really doubt he'd do it on purpose. It's something that seems like it would have such a simple conclusion. His body should be in the cave, yet we still have no idea where Ben is. This is a really strange one. I've never seen an underwater disappearance before. Now, I definitely want to get some guesses or predictions for what you think happened in the comments, because I have absolutely no idea what this could be. The fact that they found the oxygen tanks is really weird too, because he didn't drown. I mean, he had air. There was air down there, so I don't know, just a very weird case. Okay, so this is the one that's not from Reddit. This one is actually from a news station in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's another one of those unexplainable disappearances. On the night of September 23rd, 2012, 7-year-old Gage Daniel and 9-year-old Chloe Leverett were living with their grandparents in Bedford County when a fire broke out at the home. The remains of both grandparents, a dog, and even the remains of a small pet bird were found, but there were no signs of Gage or Chloe. Nothing, not a tooth, not a morsel, not anything, Daniel said. That prompted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to issue an Amber Alert, and nearly 9 years later, they still consider this a missing persons case, not a death investigation. Last year, the TBI shared an age-progressed photo of Gage and Chloe, who would now be 16 and 18. I talked to the crematorium, and they said to cremate a body, it has to be 5,000 degrees. My mom and dad's house was just 1,800 degrees. And even after they cremate the body, there's still a muscle, and there are a couple other bones that they have to grind because they don't burn. There would have been something left. They would have found something of Chloe and Gage. Multiple experts were brought in to sift through the debris several times, each time verifying the children's remains were not missed. Daniel believes the fire was set on purpose. For anyone who has any idea where her children might be, Daniel begs them to pass it along somehow. Just pick up the phone and say where they're at. You don't have to give your name, number, nothing like that, Daniel said. When her children went missing, Daniel was battling addiction, from which she's come full circle and now serves as a certified peer recovery specialist. What matters to her now is getting her children home. So apparently, scientifically, there should be something left of these kids in this debris, but they haven't found anything. And like logic just says, I mean, after looking through this house several times, knowing that they're looking for any piece of remains from these children and they weren't able to find anything, that's just crazy. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into this because, honestly, it deserves a video of its own. There's so much to this case. But way back on Christmas of 1945, the Sauter family had a huge house fire, and it all burned down to the ground. And 5 of the children were completely missing from the fire debris. There was nothing there. So that's the strange thing. This is not the first time in history that this has happened. And there was just never anything found of these people. A lot of people think that for both of these fires, there was some sort of a kidnapping or something like that, and that the fire was just set as a diversion. Now, it's really hard to say what actually happened for either of these, but for the Sauter family, it's very likely we're never going to find out what happened to them. But with this more recent one that happened back in 2012, it's hard to say. I mean, how do we know that they're not just going to pop up someday? So I hope that these kids do pop up and let their family know that they're alright. This next one is from the Glitch in the Matrix subreddit, which is honestly the perfect place to find these stories. I think I might have shared this already, but I need to go into more detail with what happened. About 6 to 8 years ago, my friend Giovanni and I left my house to go get some late night McDonald's, you know, just as young fellas do at 2 a.m. after a night of partying. We got into his white Mustang, left the neighborhood, and began driving down one of the main roads towards McDonald's, which was about 2 miles away. As we cross an intersection just about a half-mile away from McDonald's, we get slammed by another car and thrown, and we proceed to roll. All I remember from the impact is that the car was speeding very fast. The impact was brutal. Glass shards flew everywhere, and the sound of plastic and metal scraping the asphalt. We died upon impact. We were gone. Then it all just went black. I saw the car was annihilated looking at it from above. The scene was distressing. Then, just as soon as the scene of our deaths played out, it abruptly ended, and we automatically went back to where we were both standing at the front door, about to leave the McDonald's. I look over at Gio, and Gio is tearing up and shaking with his hand on the doorknob. I say, "Bro, what the fuck was that? If we leave and go right now, we're going to die in a car crash." All he replied with was something along the lines of, "I know." Gio was shaking terribly, and I felt sick to my stomach. We had both just lived out our deaths. We both stepped away from the door and walked back into my family room and sat down on the couch and didn't say a word to each other. We just stared off into the distance. I had lived my own death, and so did he. We both knew it, and we both had no idea how to explain it. The best way I can explain it is that it felt like a dream that was almost too real to be a dream. We assuredly left the house and almost made it to McDonald's, but we got hit at an intersection then flashed back almost immediately to my house. If y'all have seen that episode of Rick and Morty where Morty gets a do-over control, it was exactly like that. It's like we experienced and lived our deaths, then simply had a do-over and respawned to 10 to 15 minutes earlier. We were also sober. We were from Utah. We were in high school at the time. No drinking or drugs back then. Partying in the sense of dance parties in Utah, which are a thing here. Now this takes us back to those out-of-body experiences we were talking about before. Assuming these guys aren't bullshitting, like, they both experienced the same thing together, which is very weird. It's even more terrifying that they had the feeling of everything just going black, as he said. Now I know that this one sounds a little bit crazy, but again, like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, assuming that these guys aren't lying, and this isn't a subreddit known for that stuff, these people are telling the truth and they're just trying to make sense of things that have happened to them. So, what do you think? What do you think? I want to hear your comments as to sort of an explanation for this. Now this is kind of crazy, but I was looking around on the subreddit, the same exact one from before, and I found a very similar story. Like with the whole do-over concept and everything. I don't want to get too much into it, we'll talk about it later, but here's the story. This happened when I was around 18 or 19, but I remember it vividly because of how jarring and confusing it was. I've had a few odd experiences with dreams, but nothing in the middle of the day like this. So when this happened, I was still living at home with my parents, and we lived in my childhood home. This home was pretty much all I ever knew, as we moved there when I was 3 years old. I had a habit of going on daily walks in the nearby park, something I did nearly every single day since I was 14 or 15 years of age, up until I moved out. It was the summer, around 1 or 2 p.m., and I went to leave the house for one of my walks. I slipped my shoes on and went to open the door as usual, but when I stepped out of the house and looked up, my neighborhood felt completely wrong. It didn't look different. Everything looked exactly the same as it usually did. The small ravine next to our house, the tree in the front yard, the steep driveway in our neighbors' houses, all of it looked completely normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something really wrong and different with it all. It felt as if reality was warped or something. I stood on the front porch for a minute or so trying to figure out what was so incredibly wrong with my neighborhood. After a while though, I figured I was just being silly and made my way down the driveway. When I was about halfway down, my neighbor, who was tending to his garden across the street, looked up towards me, stared at me as if he saw a ghost, his face going completely pale, and opened his mouth to speak. Before I could even stare at him in confusion, before he had even gotten a single word out, I was back inside my house at my front door about to leave. I was completely shaken. I had no idea how I ended up back through the front door. I had no idea what I had just experienced, and when I pulled the door open, it was completely normal. Nothing felt wrong anymore. It was all glaringly normal. The only difference was when I opened my door again, my neighbor was not out front gardening. I decided not to go for a walk that day. Years later, I have no idea what I experienced, and as weird as it sounds, the part that freaks me out the most is how wrong my neighborhood felt, despite looking exactly the same. So between the weird teleportation back indoors and my neighbor acting as if he was staring at a ghost, the feeling of wrongness is the thing that bothers me the most. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't feel unsafe. It didn't feel like dread. It just felt like I was looking at a completely different version of my neighborhood at that moment, and I don't think I will ever forget it. I've never really told anyone about this, as I'm usually a pretty skeptical person, but I have no way to explain it. So yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but that sounds very, very similar to the last story. Again, let's look at this with a lens of speculation. I don't want to sound like some crazy conspiracy theorist or anything, but what do you think could be a reasonable explanation for this? Or do you actually think there might be something bigger going on here? I really don't know what to think. Let me know. Okay, this one is definitely freaky, especially since this one also happened to 2 different people at the same time. I can't tell if this was some sort of a hallucination or what, but let's just get into the story. So this story is about 20 years old now. I'm 40. I was 20 at the time. I remember it very clearly, as does my mother. We were on a trip from Utah to California, passing into San Diego. The trip has an overpass that we pass under, and we've made that trip 1,000 times over the course of my life. We always use that overpass to signify the start or end of the trip, depending on which way we're going. So this trip had been grueling. We had a lot of car trouble and had been harassed by the California border because they caught us with ferrets once a few years earlier, so they regularly demand to search our car in case we were smuggling wild animals. With that in mind, we were ready to get home. It was hitting sunset as we approached the city. We passed under the landmark overpass, and my mom sighed and said, "We're home," and I cheered and we went back to listening to music. It usually took me 45 minutes from the overpass to get to our doorstep. After roughly half an hour of driving, we both started getting confused. We were passing under freeways that we wouldn't normally pass under. I started looking around to see if we had missed something when my mom said, "What is that?" And I saw something to this day that makes my head dizzy when I think too hard about it. The buildings around us were crumbling, and the freeways over us had like vines and stuff hanging from them. I audibly gasped, and my mother started saying, "What the fuck? What the fuck?" Then it was dark, and we were on the freeway, and we were passing under the overpass, except we were going the wrong way, heading out of the city instead of coming in. My mom freaked out, pulled over, and just started freaking out. I couldn't even think clearly. We were both just unable to cope with what we'd seen or where we were. We realized we were missing a couple hours, and we eventually just said it was a shared hallucination, and she said she'd been driving in a daze because of the long day. To this day, we both cannot explain what we saw or justify how we ended up on the freeway heading out of the city. I recently brought it up to my mother, and she got really quiet, and she said she remembered, told me what she remembered which matched my memories, and wouldn't talk about it any further. She refused to speculate or discuss it any further than the cold hard fact that this happened, and that's it. That was probably the craziest glitch I've ever seen. I just thought I'd share. Take it as you will, or don't. It doesn't matter to me. There were a lot of replies to this post too, and one in particular said this: "Wow, I'd like to know what you think about the scenario you saw with the buildings and stuff. Maybe it was a glimpse of a remote future where we don't live here anymore." At the time, I was too freaked out to think anything. Now looking back, I don't know what I think. I can tell you it's not a pleasant feeling when I think about it. Maybe I slipped through to another reality, maybe a glimpse of a time when man was no longer in the area. I don't know. What I can tell you is if I focus too hard on what I saw, I get dizzy and uncomfortable. I know I wasn't supposed to see it, and my mom says she feels the same way. Now again, let's be speculative here, but one person seeing this would be weird enough, but 2 people seeing it at the same time, seeing the same exact stuff, that's weird. Now, I don't know about you guys, but immediately I'm thinking of like the city from I Am Legend where there's just vines and it just doesn't look like anybody's lived there for a very long time. I don't know. Again, I don't think I believe in this stuff, but just imagining going through that myself makes my skin crawl. The other thing that freaks me out is he says that he knows that he wasn't supposed to see it, like he was seeing something just that he should not be able to experience. Here's another very unexplainable one. Again, this is shared by multiple people so we can rule out hallucinations or mental illness or anything like that. This one's titled "Time Slip Witnessed by a Family of 4. I've had plenty of time slips in my life. You know, times where the beginning and end are way further apart than the middle can account for, like a 10-minute walk taking 4 hours, that sort of a thing. I've kept them to myself because, well, I was the only witness, and if we're speculating on something supernatural versus me just being crazy, well, I don't like my odds. This is different though. This is multiple witnesses, same story. It was New Year's Eve. My husband, 2 kids, 13 and 9, and I were staying in a motel. We planned to watch the fireworks from the balcony at midnight because we were in city center and they'd be all around us, but that was hours away. The sun had just set and the sky was a misty purple. I was making dinner, sliders, which at this point were 20 minutes from being done. As I was setting up our plates, we started hearing fireworks. I checked my phone for the time. It was a little after 7. The fireworks kept going off in the distance and the kids were getting excited. They then went out on the balcony to look and asked me to come out. I kept assuring them that they were cool, but the real show started at midnight. I started to wonder myself after a while though. The fireworks just kept going, more rapid than I expected for 7 in the evening. I went outside and saw bursts of color exploding all over the sky. I marveled at it. If this was 7, what would midnight look like? Then I checked my phone again. It was 12:15. I couldn't even tell you what I did after that. I was initially disappointed along with the kids and confused along with the kids, but the more we thought about it, the weirder it seemed. We'd all witnessed the sun setting literally an hour earlier. I'd started dinner while it was still light out and it was still hot, just barely ready. It went from 7 to midnight in a few minutes. I didn't even have a wrap-up for this. I don't know what to say. I'd blame it on my phone, like the clock being off, but that can't explain midnight coming right after sunset. Husband works overnight, so he's used to time feeling weird, and that's what he chalked it up to. Son took it in stride because he's young and time travel is his jam. Daughter and I are the only ones wondering years later what the fuck happened. She'll bring it up whenever there's a special occasion and I'm cooking, like neither of us can trust when something should be done anymore. We both wait on events like we might miss it, because we know we already have before. It's very strange that they describe it as only feeling like a couple of minutes passed by the time midnight came. Like, I can see one person maybe mistaking 30 minutes for an hour, but to have an entire family of 4 feel like 5 hours went by in just a couple minutes is very weird. Alright, this next one is leaning into paranormal territory. I have no idea how to explain this one. This was posted to the Paranormal Encounters subreddit from a single dad living in Germany. There were some grammatical errors that were a little bit weird here, so I decided to clean them up, so if you see any differences between the text and what I'm saying, that's why. The title of this post is, I am worried about my daughter's safety. Hello. I couldn't sleep, so I thought now would be a good time to post this. I have an 8-year-old daughter who I'll be calling Lyanna for the sake of my child's privacy. I am a single father, and it hasn't always been easy, but before the start of Corona, we moved into a new house in northern Germany, which is close to my parents. Soon after we settled in, Lyanna started to tell me about her new friend, quickly telling me only she could see him. I brushed it off as she has always been creative. Since we were under lockdown, I thought it was normal, especially since my friend's son also had an imaginary friend. Throughout the next few months, she would tell me about him, how he would come to play with her once I put her to bed. He knew magic, and his favorite color was purple. I started to get a little worried as she seemed to know a lot about this friend. At first, I just thought it was because she was missing her real friends and my parents. So I started to spend even more time with her, even doing my work hours beforehand so I could spend the rest of the day with her. She still kept talking about this friend, but everything changed 2 nights back. I had woken up randomly around 3 in the morning. I could just feel something wasn't right, so I got up and went to go check on Lyanna. She was sleeping in her bed, though her blanket was a little different than I had left her, but I figured she'd just moved. As I was leaving, just in the corner of my eye, I saw a figure in the window that looks out to the woods outside of our home. I looked at it for a good 2 minutes before it simply disappeared. I really couldn't figure out what it was. Some part of me was thinking it was my eyes playing tricks. But that day, I asked her to draw me a picture of him. After 20 minutes or so, she gave me this. I don't even know what to make of it, to be real with you. I sent it to my mom in the single dad group I'm in, and they all said it was scary as hell. I really don't know what to do at this point. I'm becoming worried for my child, and I'm just hoping this really is just in her mind, but I don't know anymore. Any suggestions or tips would be helpful, as I'm also worried that I'm overreacting. Now, all those little details, like the fact that this friend comes and visits her in the middle of the night, and like, the weird drawing has so many little things too, like the long fingers and like the long black toes, and it even has red eyes. Like, what kind of a kid would find that, like, friendly? And let's not forget that the dad saw something very weird outside that window. Yeah, so a lot of weird things going on in this post, but I'm not gonna make this a ghost video, so we're gonna move on. But do you guys believe in ghosts, or like any paranormal shit at all, or are you completely skeptical about everything? Let me know in the comments. Okay, this is a very short one, but wow, I had to put this one in here. My mom died 13 years ago. About 4 years ago, my dad was on vacation in Arizona with his girlfriend. He said he was up watching TV and the hotel phone rang. He answered it and said it was my mom's voice saying, "I'm okay." He said, "Cass?" He said the phone was crackly and said to tell Heather, me, that I'm okay. He said his girlfriend was confused why the phone rang. He immediately called me even though it was late and he was crying. My dad doesn't believe in the supernatural, but still to this day, he can't explain that call. Yeah, the strangeness of this one definitely speaks for itself. I mean, the fact that it literally said her name is just beyond a coincidence, I'd think. Now again, a lot of people seem to have these weird experiences right after a loved one dies. I know this was 13 years old, but still. Again, if you have any interesting stories like that, be sure to leave them below because I look through every single comment, or I at least try to, and I'd love to hear some of them. This one was posted in April of 2021, also in the Glitch in the Matrix subreddit. I, 24 years old, live alone with my daughter, 2-year-old, and our 2 pet bunnies. So I had lunch with my daughter and it started getting cold and dark, so we went into my bedroom and closed the door to the kitchen. She always plays in my bedroom and her bedroom that are directly connected. I was reading some Reddit stories while listening to her, making her usual noises, talking to herself, singing, asking me questions, moving toys around, and the basic children stuff. Suddenly, the house goes completely silent, and after a few seconds, I think that maybe she's being mischievous and doing something she isn't supposed to, like all kids do. So I go to check on her since I don't see her from where I was laying. Let me make it clear that there is no way for her to go outside without opening the creaky door to the kitchen that is right in front of me. And she never tried to do it since the lights in the kitchen are off, and she's scared of the dark. So I look everywhere in her bedroom and start calling her name. Nothing. Check in her closet. Nothing. Under her bed. In her little play tent. In her toy chest. Under my bed. Under the sofa. My desk. Everywhere. Nothing. She is nowhere to be seen. Let's mention she has never tried to hide and stuff like that. She comes when she is called, so I started to freak out. I knew I didn't hear her leave my bedroom to the kitchen, but I checked anyways. Nothing. The bathroom. Empty. Now I'm starting to panic. I go inside again to check everything over while I'm in her bedroom, and I hear crying from outside. I look through my daughter's window to see her outside laying on the ground, only wearing a t-shirt. Not the t-shirt she was wearing previously, but one of the t-shirts she does have. I ran outside, almost falling over, but when I opened the door, silence. She wasn't there. I go outside and check everything and can't find her or any trace of her being there. Defeated, I go back upstairs ready to call 911 when I go to my bedroom and see her calmly playing with some blocks in her bedroom. She was wearing the same clothes as before, as if she never disappeared. The t-shirt I saw her wearing outside was in her wardrobe, neatly folded. I'm still in shock and sitting staring at my daughter, feeling that if I blink, she might disappear again. Now, I'm not a parent, but I know that the feeling of not being able to track your child must be absolutely horrifying. Now again, I don't want to seem like I'm implying that all these crazy things are happening or that paranormal shit is real, but like, how can you explain that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. In this one specifically, I just can't see this being something that you just fake up and try to get attention for, because it's just so weird. Like, the daughter randomly being outside in a different shirt and then coming back in, like, where would that even come from in your head, you know? I know people tell fake stories on Reddit sometimes, but specifically in this subreddit, it's very discouraged to tell fake stories. This is all supposed to be real stuff and real accounts, so I don't know, I can't see this being a fake, made-up story. At the same time, though, I could have definitely seen this all being caused by, like, paranoia of losing your kid. I mean, that's gotta make any mother go insane. But yeah, above all, I mean, I would love to know where that daughter went. Like, even if she didn't fade out of existence, like, where did she go if the mother looked everywhere, you know? Alright, this one is like straight out of a horror movie. Wait until you hear this. This one comes from an Ask Reddit thread titled Eerie Towns, Disappearing Diners, and Creepy Gas Stations. What's your true, unexplained story of being in a place that shouldn't exist? This story takes place in the mid-90s, a time before widely used cell phones and GPS. My 2 best friends and I, freshly able to drive, decided we would head out on a Saturday to a water park in southern Missouri, about a 3-hour drive from our hometown in northwest Arkansas. We had never been before and just used road maps to get there. We had pretty fantastic time, but as the sun started to reach the tree line, we thought we ought to head home. It's about 7 o'clock and we miss a turn, but my friend Paul, who was navigating, said not to worry. Another turn was coming up that would get us there just as fast. The next turn took us from detoured to completely lost. By 8 o'clock, we were on a road that seemed to be lacking in road signs, and there were 0 lights. We finally see a gas station and are relieved to get some directions as well as some gas. My friend Taylor and I go inside while Paul pumps the gas. We come inside and see a very friendly old man in his early 60s who gives us a very large grin and says, "Well, hello there." It was very Foghorn Leghorn-esque, looked like an extreme hillbilly, but very pleasant. We explained that we were needing gas and wanted to fill up. He explained that he was about to shut down for the night, but would be happy to oblige us. "You have to make haste though. Tonight is buffer night." Taylor and I looked at each other and shared an awkward look. We asked him if he could point out our location on the road map. While he was finding it, 2 people entered the shop from the back and called out for the old man. He was up front. The two approached us, a man and a woman, and the first looked confused, as though hit with an epiphany. They smiled. They asked the old man, "Are these the guests tonight?" He shot them a look and said, "No, these are some lost children." The way he said children caused the hairs on my neck to stand up. Not sure why. They looked at us and said, "The three of you should make haste, because tonight is buffer night." Two things scared the shit out of me right then. The first being, how did they know about Paul pumping gas out front when they came in from the back? And the second being that they repeated the old man verbatim. We clarified the directions to get back on a main highway and paid for the gas without waiting for change. Taylor and I booked it out of the gas station to find Paul already in the passenger seat. When we got into the car, we were nearly airborne from the speed we took off. Before we could say anything, Paul told us about how three men from across the street stood under a tree just watching them. He waved, but they didn't move a muscle. We drove as fast as we could until we got back to the highway. To this day, I will still have a nightmare every so often about that gas station and what my imagination has twisted buffer night into being. Holy shit, yeah, I have no guesses for that one. What could buffer night be? That's like an oddly specific phrase. I don't know, let me know what you think. Okay, this one's from the same Ask Reddit thread as the last one. Now, this is fairly similar to some of the other stories, and while the explanation I'll give at the end is not confirmed by OP, it was left in the comments, and I think it seems to make some sense, so we'll cover that too. By my hometown, there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara Escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was around 19 or 20, and we were crawling around and found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there or seen it before. So we pushed forward and decided to check it out even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have the flashlight function. We stepped into the cave and it must have been 20 to 30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around with the light that we had, we noticed that it was really clean inside this cave, and it didn't have beer cans littered around everywhere else like all the other small caves did. While in there, we got a really eerie feeling after being in there shortly, hearing weird and strange things, feeling like we were being touched, poked, and pulled, but not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was so dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing around with the others, although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered, it was midday. Somehow, we had lost 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week, but have never been able to find this cave again. And now on to that explanation I was talking about earlier. Natural gas leak, if that's a thing? It's odorless naturally, or some other type of gas leak causing oxygen deprivation. Lost time, uneasy feelings, or hallucinations are all symptoms. Edit, before anyone else says, but wouldn't it have caught fire with the lighters? Natural gas might have, but carbon monoxide or some other gases wouldn't have. OP replied, that's an oddly comforting thought. It really does sound like oxygen deprivation. People often describe this inexplicable sense of unease or doom. Carbon monoxide leaks in houses often have made people think the place is haunted. There was that famous case on Reddit where the guy thought his landlord was breaking into his house and leaving him notes. So I don't know a lot about caves or gas leaks or anything like that, but if that's at all plausible, maybe that was it, I don't know. This next one was posted to the paranormal subreddit only like a month ago. It only has a couple upvotes, so I can guarantee you haven't seen this one yet. This happened a few years back, and though I've experienced other strange phenomenon since, this in particular is stuck in my brain. I worked as a server at what was portrayed to be a high-class evening restaurant where a reservation was required. The restaurant was inside of a pre-Civil War era stone house and located right in the center of a well-known haunted town with a lot of history. It was around 4:50 p.m., 10 minutes before opening. I was the only one on the schedule that night, besides for the chef. The dining room had large street-facing windows that had been sealed shut for years with no other opening to the outside. Everything was set up for the night, and all I had left to do was lighting the 15 or so candles that decorated the mantel and tables. The candles had no trouble sparking up, and they had steady, consistent flames. Before exiting from the dining room, I took a last remaining glimpse to ensure perfection and was very happy with my work. I then left for the kitchen to quickly check in with the chef before operating. I made my way back to the dining room after no more than a minute or two, and I'm not kidding, every single candle had been blown out. There was still smoke lingering from all 15 candles as well. My mind can't come up with any explainable logic behind it. There was no possible entrance into the dining room besides the front door, which had been firmly locked. The chef and I were the only two people there, and he wouldn't have been able to leave the kitchen without me noticing, since there's only one pathway between the two rooms. No fans or open doors, as stated before, sealed shut windows. I remember the air feeling abnormally still and getting an overwhelming sense of discomfort and dread upon re-entrance, as if I was being watched. Up until this day, I still haven't been able to find any solid reasoning behind the occurrence, and truly believe something unworldly was making itself known. So I don't know what to say for this one. I mean, to recap, all the doors and windows were closed. There were two people in that building, and neither of them could have been in the dining room when the candles went out. He even remembers the air in the room feeling abnormally still, so what could have caused this? Beyond that, all the candles lit up normally and everything was fine, so honestly no idea what this could have been. Okay, this next one's a bit longer than the others, but it's definitely freaky. Now, even if you don't believe in paranormal shit or anything like that, just put yourself in the mind of this kid. I mean, this was a young kid. And just to feel the paranoia and dread that she was feeling is terrifying. I mean, I think everybody remembers that feeling from, like, nightmares and stuff as a kid. Anyways, just because this one's a little bit longer, go grab a snack and get comfortable. I grew up in a densely forested rural area in central Virginia, and like most kids my age, 10 at the time of the story, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. My best friend and I had found a creek one day while exploring different deer trails through the woods. This creek we happened on was a very rare find and the perfect spot for us to play. It was wide and deep enough to swim in, and had nice soft mossy banks on either side to rest on after we had tired ourselves out. The water was cool and clear, no copperheads and no mosquitoes because the water was constantly running. We were psyched. After a few hours of swimming, we had to walk back home for lunch, but made plans to pack lunch the next day so we could have a picnic on the creek banks and spend the whole day there. The next morning we set out for the woods at around 1 p.m., planning to have the picnic first and then swim after. We entered at the same spot we had the previous day and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It was not. At the point where we should have found the creek, we walked into a small clearing that was covered in huge, thick ferns. We had definitely never walked past this before. So, being both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat in the clearing. We laughed and played around there for a while, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in wonderful, giddy moods. That all changed, however, as soon as we packed up and set back out to find the creek. As we walked on, the woods started to feel darker and colder. We got skittish, and I noticed my friend kept whipping her head around to look behind us. After about an hour of walking, we came up on what looked like an entire overgrown bathroom. Sink, toilet, and bathtub all sitting arranged together and covered in ivy. It's pretty common to find weird shit like this in the middle of the woods, so we just walked on and made jokes to lighten the mood, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking and not seeing anything we recognized, we started to panic. Instead of trying to reach the creek, we were now just trying to find our way back home or out of the woods at least. I told her we should follow the sun and eventually we'd come up on a road or someone's property where we could find help. She insisted on another way, and we began yelling at each other out of fear and, let's be honest, little girl bossiness. I told her if she thought she was so right, she could just go and find her own way out and we'd see who'd get out first. Now, as an adult, I fully acknowledge I was being a stubborn brat and also an idiot. Worst possible thing we could have done. Not 10 minutes after splitting up, I began to hear someone walking maybe 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend deciding to go my way after all, I slow down so she can catch up to me. Instead, whatever it was matched my pace. I slowed down, it slows down. I stop, it stops. This went on for hours. The whole time I was going back and forth on whether or not it was in my head or it was really something following me. I picked up a big stick, swung it a few times to make sure it was sturdy if I had to hit someone, and trucked on. As it began to get dark, I came up on something that made my heart sink into my stomach. It was Bigfoot's bathroom. I had just walked in a huge circle for hours, despite being 100% sure I was following the setting sun west the entire time. Confused and frustrated, I sat down on a log and just screamed my little heart out while smacking my whoop-ass stick repeatedly onto the ground. As I tried to collect myself, I heard the footsteps again, walking up on me from behind. I called out my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. Then, after a short pause, the steps began to run towards me. I jumped up and booked it as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Now, this is the truly horrifying part, which I typically omit while telling people this story. As I was sprinting through the darkening woods, I began to hear what I thought were church bells. I look up to see the darkest, deepest cloud I have ever seen in my life. In the middle, it was so black it was like looking into the night sky, and the dark gray around it seemed to be swirling. It gave me a horrible feeling to look at, almost like the nausea you get when looking through binoculars too long. What sickened me further is that I realized the sound of the bell was coming through the hole in the cloud. They were deafeningly loud, I mean really booming out of this thing. When I realized this, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt a sense of absolute and overwhelming dread that has gone unmatched in all my 24 years on this planet. Something in my head began screaming that if I did not run away from whatever the hell that cloud was, no one would ever see me again. I would be gone. I did not want to run toward the thing chasing behind me either though, so I made a sharp right and took off away from both. It was now completely dark and I was running blind through the woods, smacking through branches, wheezing, and tripping every few feet for what seemed like an hour. Until I smacked into something low and flew over it, hitting the ground so hard all the air in my lungs was knocked out of me. As I lay there trying to recover, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. Then my eyes adjusted more to the dark, and I realized what had just made me go ass over teeth was an old fence. Grabbing hold of it, I prayed it would lead me to a farm, and sure enough, it did. I walked up over a hill about a half-mile to the back of the farmhouse, explained what had happened, and the farmer graciously gave me a ride back home. I was covered head to toe in scrapes, oozing blood, and more exhausted than I had ever been in my life, but I was finally safe. It was past 9 p.m. when I finally walked through my front door. My friend had gotten back shortly after we split and figured I had as well, so hadn't told anybody I was lost. And my family just figured I was still out after dark, which wasn't uncommon for me. They were shocked when I walked in beat up and crying. Nobody had been looking for me at all. To this day, I wonder how long they would have waited to come find me if I hadn't been lucky enough to find the fence, and if it would have been too late. So yeah, I don't know about you guys, but personally, I think I'm just gonna file this one underneath childhood paranoia. I mean, when you go nuts like that and you're really freaking out, you can see things, you know what I mean? But if you guys have any other opinions, let me know. I do think it's weird that she heard a lot of footsteps. I mean, that's kind of hard to explain. But the cloud in the sky and the church bells, that's also very weird. But maybe the church bells were just coming from like far away. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Okay, this next one has video evidence, and you want to talk about unexplainable shit? Wait till you see this one. Here's the post that was made in the paranormal subreddit back in 2019. So, for additional backstory, my brother was alone at my mom's house, probably to check on our dog Oscar, as both my mom and stepdad work day jobs, when the light in our hallway turned on and off. My brother began recording with the hope to capture it on video, in which he succeeded. Now, after watching the video countless times, I am stumped and believe there is something beyond our knowledge happening here. Having lived in this house for over 2 years myself, the house does have weird vibes to it, but I have never personally witnessed something like this. You'll see in the video that the light begins to turn on and off, and on 2 separate occasions, you can see the switch literally moving. The first time it goes down perfectly halfway, which is very odd to me and would be damn near impossible to recreate so perfectly with anything tied to the switch. The second time, which is much more obvious, the light slams down, to which my brother reacts appropriately by getting the fuck out of there. What are y'all's thoughts and opinions on this video? Genuinely curious as to what you guys think.
Okay, so it's doing it again. That switch down there is on. You see it past my shaking. This one is on, okay? It's Mom. See what I mean? It's fucking. You can hear it. You fucking. Mom. Nope.
My mom still lives in that house and tells me of weird experiences she has in it. So I guess somebody could have used some like clear tape and some fishing line and maybe tied it to the switch and flicked it up and down, but at the same time though, I feel like some of the light would have reflected off that string and you would have been able to see it, so I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical of ghost videos in general, so I don't really know what to think about this, but it's very strange to see both of those switches moving. I mean, the one in the back and the one closest to them were going up and down, so I don't know what to think. Alright, kind of a short one here, but this one is probably one of the more unexplainable ones on this entire video. And although this is going to be fairly obvious, this is also from the Glitch in the Matrix subreddit. So I dropped my phone in the kitchen and I looked to grab it off the floor, but it wasn't there. I heard it hit the floor, but I couldn't find it. It was in the middle of the room too. There was no way it could have gone more than 3 feet away from me. I checked under everything and went through the entire house looking for it, but it was gone. I had my mom call my phone and it said that the line was disconnected. I checked the Find My iPhone app and it said that it couldn't find my phone because it couldn't find a signal. That was 4 years ago and we still haven't found it. It's like it hit the ground and immediately disappeared afterwards. Dude, if this guy isn't screwing around, where the f*** did that phone go? The fact that they couldn't even find it after calling it or after going through the Find My iPhone app is especially weird. Now here's the weird thing about the Find My iPhone app. Even if the phone is dead now, they still let you be able to track it. It always holds onto a little bit of charge just so you can keep finding the phone. I mean, this is literally like the backroom story. Like, it's literally like it just no-clipped through the floor. Now, a big reason why I want to mention this one is because I actually have a personal story that's very similar to this. So when I was like really little, I had like this little die. It was like this big and it was red. And I will never forget, I was playing with it in my room. I was kind of like pushing it into the carpet a little bit. I don't know how to explain it, but all of a sudden I went to go like find it in the carpet fibers and it was gone. And I looked everywhere for it. And I just like rubbed my hands all over the carpet. I looked under everything to see if it like maybe just flew out somewhere, but I never found it. I stayed in that room for like 16 years of my life, and this was a long time ago, and I just never found it. It was very weird. Strange stories aside, back to the video. Okay, this next one kind of gives me chills. Maybe it's just the title, but whenever there's like shared experiences, again, when there's like two people who experience the same weird thing, it just makes it impossible to explain. The title of this one is An Unseen Force May Have Tried to Lure Me Off the Road to My Death by Altering Reality. Title sounds ridiculous, but hear me out. This happened a few years ago. I was driving through East Pennsylvania, and I'm giving this girl I had just met at a friend's house that night a ride back to her place. Now, getting to her house involves going down a one-lane road that I had driven on at least 100 times prior to this. At one section, the road meanders around a ridge by making a giant right turn. Then it does a sharp turn left after a couple hundred yards, and then right again, where these two logs laying on the side of the road make a kind of X shape in the ground. It's a very distinctive landmark, at least for me. This is the way this road has always been. So there we are, trying to find topics to talk about to keep the car ride from becoming awkward since we hardly know each other. We take a right turn, round a bend, and then a sharp left turn, and then there's a left turn up ahead. Immediately, my body goes into fight or flight mode. I remember thinking, this isn't right. I know there's a right turn here. This is not what is supposed to be here. We both fell dead silent and just looked ahead in confusion. The road about 100 yards in front of me just turned left and disappeared off into the woods. To the right there was nothing, just the side of a hill and some trees. It looked completely natural, not like a mirage or anything, yet it felt so strange and almost intentionally deceptive. None of this made sense. I knew these roads, and as we approached the turn, I decided that I'm not going down that road. Something bad was down that road, so I just made the irrational decision to turn right instead and hope for the best. The girl in the car put her hands on the dashboard to brace for impact. My eyes were still fixated down the left-turning road as I started steering to my right, and then as my gaze shifted towards the direction I was now driving in, suddenly I could see the correct road in front of me again. Everything was back to normal. I looked in the rearview mirror, and sure enough, the left-turning road was non-existent. My hands felt icy cold, and I was physically shaking. I pulled over to my right, and just sat there in silence. We contemplated going back to investigate, but just looking at the road behind me gave me a sick feeling in my stomach. She felt it too. I was very hesitant to go back down that road again, and avoided it as best as I could after that. But a few weeks or months later, I decided to go back in the daytime to check it out. I pulled over at the right turn spot, got out of my car, and walked around the area. This is the part that really freaks me out. I quickly found out that on the left side of the road, obscured by some thick underbrush, was a very steep, rocky cliff that dropped off maybe 200 to 250 feet into a ravine. The phantom road would have taken me directly through a clearing in between the two trees that led straight over the cliff. If I had chosen not to follow my gut and drove down that road, there's a very, very good chance that we both would have been seriously injured or killed. Apparently several people have crashed in that area by driving down into the ravine. Might just be a coincidence, but who knows. I don't know what to make of this event. If I was alone, I'd be more willing to write it off as a hallucination or a trick of the eye, but I wasn't alone. She saw the same thing I did. I wasn't intoxicated, although my passenger was a bit buzzed if I remember correctly. I've also never experienced anything out of the ordinary in my entire life other than this. Yeah, I don't know what to say about this one. Again, it's these almost shared hallucinations that really freak me out, because it's like, how do you even begin to explain that? Both people seeing the same thing at the same time. I don't know. Again, this was experienced by many different people at the same time. This was posted back in 2014. 10 years ago, I was returning home from a road trip with two friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we'd be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later, we came around a bend. It was a full moon, and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that, the road was completely empty. Suddenly, everything went completely dark in the car. No lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted from the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about a quarter mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar though, and after about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time. Maybe it also turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were a whole hour late. I'm missing an hour from my life, and to this day I have no idea how it happened. Now the first thing my mind kind of jumps to with this one is like a natural EMP, maybe something from like a solar flare. I don't know if that's a little bit crazy, but that's just what I first thought of. Now the thing is though, regardless of whether or not that's even plausible, I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it doesn't even explain the whole entire hour that was lost to them, so I don't know, I don't know how to explain this one. Here's another very strange one. It happened in early 2000 when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. This one night when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "I work tonight." And he said, "But they said you called in a few hours ago, saying you were sick." I was a bit confused and I said it must have been someone else and they got the message wrong. After everyone else showed up for work that night, it was a bit more weird, but we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones, and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I called in at 6:50 and that I'd gotten sick while out cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before, and it was a bit bad, but nothing that I had to go out and clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control room about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside work, and we started talking about it and how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it while she was still sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, a man picked up the phone with a raspy voice and said, "Hello?" I didn't know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I dialed the right number, and I had. After a few seconds, the person said, "Hello?" again in the same raspy voice. I said, "Hello, who is this?" "This is Taylor." "Who is this?" the person said. My head started spinning because my name is Taylor also. I said in almost a scream, "Where is Anne?" He said, "Anne's in bed. Who is this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home and I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say, "Hello?" followed soon after by, "What the fuck?" rather loudly. I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal for sure, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door and my wife was sitting watching TV and was shocked at me being home. I asked her who was there and she said no one has been here. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work and when I came in, Dave was acting weird and asked me, "How the hell are you doing this?" He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone and the person on the other end sounded like me. He kind of freaked out and hung up the phone. A minute later, as he could see my car leaving the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the fuck was going on. He said that I was a bit irate and said that I was sick and did not feel like playing these games and was telling him to stop prank calling me and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I found out that the phone line for my area had been knocked down the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. And guys, that's all I've got for you. That's all the stories. Now wait, before you go, if you're new here, please be sure to subscribe for new stories just like these. I'm consistently going to be putting videos out like these where we just go through some crazy stories online, so if this video interested you, which apparently it did, I mean you've been sitting here for like an hour, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you see more stuff from me. Again, I really hope you guys like this, and if you have any strange stories like these, be sure to comment them down below. Anyways, I'm bad at outros. Blah!